We're here with Reynold Raymond, and you're the big boss here at, what do you call the place? Is this still a hospital it's called?
No. It's, the name of the agency is now Northern Maine General. It's no longer Northern Maine General Hospital. It stopped being a hospital in 1966.
Oh, that far?
Yes.
So it's known as Northern Maine General, which means nursing and
we provide
rehab?
Yeah, we provide a variety of services now. We're still in healthcare, but we're not in acute healthcare.
Oh, okay.
We provide long-term care, and we provide care for children, mental health services for children, as well as services for people with developmental disabilities. We have, right now, the agency has roughly 10 divisions, 10 different services that we provide, and we employ somewhere between 275 to 300 people.
Wow. In Eagle Lake, Maine.
Yes.
That's a big industry.
Yes, it is. And the irony is that about only 23% of the people we hire come from Eagle Lake. The rest come from surrounding areas, from as far as Allagash, Caribou, Presque Isle. We have some from Van Buren. So used to be that most of the people who work for us came from Eagle Lake, but that's no longer the case now.
Is it because there's not enough people in Eagle Lake? Or?
Oh yeah, there's not enough people to sustain the business that we would have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your capacity for the people that you work with, the patients?
Well, on the nursing home side, we have a 40-bed nursing home. And then in the unit itself, we have 10 beds that we've blocked off for what is called residential care. So at the nursing home, we provide 3 different levels of services. We provide nursing, then we provide skill, or what they call rehab, okay. And we also provide residential care.
What is residential care?
Residential care is another term that's oftentimes used there is assisted living. So this is for people who medically are not needy enough to be in a nursing home, but they cannot really independently stay in their own homes.
Okay. So they can go out and drive their car?
Oh yeah, they can go out and drive their car. They simply, all they do is they rent a place from us, and we provide them the services that they need. Okay.
So that's great. That's a great service. Then the kids you talk about there, what's that all about? Children?
Well, we provide assistance to parents who have children with emotional or behavioral issues. We go into their homes. We have case managers that go into their homes and work with them. They develop a plan, a behavioral plan, and they follow the child along with the parent. The parent and the child is involved in trying to figure out, first of all, what some of the triggers are, and then based on those triggers, a plan is developed, and then the plan is implemented for the child as well as the parent.
So they're not residents?
No, they're not residents.
Oh, okay.
Those are in-home supports that we provide for kids with behavioral needs, yeah, or kids that have developmental disabilities.
And how far is your area that you serve?
We cover all of northern Aroostook, from Presque Isle north.
Really?
Yes.
So
we serve somewheres right now. We're serving somewheres in one program. In the developmental disability program for children, we serve, I believe it's around 28 kids. And then in the other program, in-home services for behavioral health needs, we serve probably another 15 kids there.
Oh.
So we do that in Caribou, Presque Isle, Fort Kent.
So you're the only one that's doing that there?
No, there are other agencies that do it as well.
Area?
Yes, in the same area. Yeah.
So they have a choice they want to.
Yes, they have a choice of providers.
To do it.
Yes.
Now, Reynold Raymond, you're the big boss here, and how long have you been doing this?
I've been CEO here for 20 years.
20 years?
Yes.
Now, you told me a while ago, because we've talked before, that your family comes from Saint Agathe.
Yes.
And what brought them to Eagle Lake?
My grandparents, on the Raymond side, came from Frenchville. My grandmother, who eventually married my grandfather, came from Saint Agathe. She was a Ranguette.
Okay.
And,
now the Raymonds, like Morris Raymond, who worked for the railroad there, Don
no,
Raymond?
I don't have. It's strange. The Raymond family that moved from Frenchville, all of them moved from Frenchville to Eagle Lake. So I have no relatives that I know of in Frenchville. They moved all here. The grandfather, or my great grandfather, moved. And he moved all his family, and his family was pretty much, well, the youngest one must have been in their 30s when they moved. It was a family that lived on a farm.
Okay.
And they decided that when they heard about some of the opportunities that the mill here in Eagle Lake provided, they were having a hard time on their farm. They decided to sell the farm and move here.
So we're talking 100 years ago?
Yeah, it was probably around the early 1900s. Around 1903, 1904.
Now, what was the big attraction here in Eagle Lake?
Well, here in Eagle Lake, it was like exciting times there. The railroad had just come through, or was in the process of coming through. They had a company by the name of Eagle Lake Lumber Company had just built a series of mills. They had bought roughly 125 acres on the southeastern shore of Eagle Lake.
That's where the old Main Street is?
Yeah, right there. The old Main Street, right just below the railroad tracks, where we have the marina today.
Okay.
That whole section from the railroad tracks down to very close to Fish River camps, there, the camps they used to call Camps of Acadia.
Yeah.
Up all the way there was pretty much owned by Fish River Lumber Company. So they operated basically 5 different mills. They had a rotary mill, they had a shingle mill, they had a lath mill, they had a kindling mill, and then they had planters. They build.
What's a rotary mill?
It's the sawmill.
So they cut logs.
They cut logs, and then they made shingles. They made shiplap, what the people used to use to put on their buildings.
Instead of siding?
As a siding, yeah.
Okay.
And then they made kindling out of some of the waste products that they had. And the kindling mill was pretty much operated by women.
Really?
Yes, they employed at one time up to 30 women there. So it was a pretty big operation. It was one of the biggest operations in Maine. And so it attracted a lot of people.
So that's how Eagle Lake grew.
That's how it grew. The mill built 25 tenement buildings on that street.
Really?
And eventually it became known as Slab Alley. So when people say Slab Alley, it's because really the mill was piling wood on both sides of the road, so it was just an alley. And then at the end of the alley, they had their tenement houses, because a lot of the people that moved here didn't have a place to stay, so they rented. They rented from the mill. In fact,
the company store. Huh?
They had built one of those too. They had a company store. They had a hotel, or a boarding house that they called it, but it could accommodate up to 125 people.
Wow.
And what they used to do is they'd contract with these wood jobbers to get the wood to the mill. So a lot of them really didn't have the money to begin to go for a whole winter, so they'd buy all their products from the company store. They'd buy it on credit. And then they'd square off at the end of the season with the company.
Now this was common in those days because my grandfather went in the woods and his wife bought everything on credit all winter long.
Oh yeah.
And he'd come in, and everybody was doing that, I guess, and pay all his bills.
Yes.
And it seemed to work.
Yeah, it did.
Nobody got, you know, the stores, they trusted and they...
Yeah. Because when I was growing up here in town, a lot of the stores provided credit.
Really?
I remember going to the store, and my mother would send me to the store with a list but no cash. and
What year was that about?
Oh, that would have been
50s?
late 50s, early 60s. And I used to go to Gilman Devoe's store, or Philip Blanchette's store, and buy what we needed to have, and my father would go in once a month, and he'd square up.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, now, your father was, what was he doing?
My dad's name was Orel, and he was a janitor at Eagle Lake School. He was a janitor for some 30 years. But he was also the local handyman. He did plumbing, he did electrical, and he did carpentry. So he moonlighted a lot on his job. At the time when he was janitor, when he was first janitor, it was a town school. And I can remember sometimes people coming over, like Claude Martin, who operated Camps of Acadia. He'd come over to the Eagle Lake School and tell my dad, I got a pump that's gone bad there, can you come over? And my dad would go, leave his work at school and go over there and take care of it. And it was a real informal type of employment.
A different world.
It was a different world, yes, it was.
Now, today, he probably couldn't do that.
No, today, my maintenance people working here couldn't do that. No, they couldn't.
Plus, they need a license. And
Yes.
They need,
so my dad never had a license.
No.
And at the time, he could have been grandfathered in a lot of these things,
Oh, is that right?
but my dad didn't feel the need to do that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but he did that until really until he died in 1972, 74.
He wasn't old, huh?
No, he was about 60 years old when he died.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, we come back to the early years here. Here's Eagle Lake in the middle of the woods, really. There was always a road all the way up. The 11 was Ashland and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah. The road here had been really constructed because of the boundary dispute.
Yeah.
And they had constructed it from Holton up to Fort Kent. In fact, the settler that settled in Eagle Lake, a guy by the name of Devoe, he originally was from Fort Kent. And when they decided to build the blockhouse on the fort in Fort Kent, they took over his farm. So in trade, what they did is they gave him land up here in Eagle Lake. And he ended up settling at in Eagle Lake here on Route 11, place that now we all commonly refer to it as Nadeau Hill.
Oh.
But he was the first settler here.
And what's the connection with him and St. Floyd Lake?
Sifois?
It was named after him.
Yes.
Like in Saint Agathe, you know, Long Lake, 100 years ago, was known as Lac à Menon.
Right.
Because the first settler there was Menon Ouellette.
Okay.
It's a Lac à Menon, see. So I figured, or somebody told me that they couldn't understand what Sifois meant, so they
Yeah.
called him Saint Freud.
Yeah, but it was his name was Sifois Nadeau.
What?
So how they came to name the lake after him, or if anybody realized that they did that, and I don't know how the saint came in there, but
Yeah.
it
Well,
eventually came.
Sifois, you know,
Yeah.
in English it might say, oh, Saint
Yeah,
Freud.
Saint Freud. Yeah.
Now, wasn't he the brother of José Nadeau, who's supposed to be the first settler in Fort Kent?
I believe so. Yes, I believe he was. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I had
So-
heard that story before. I'm glad to hear it again from you because that's where you live right here.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was in the 1840s and 50s when they
Yeah.
first came here, and then from there, and there was nothing much happening in Eagle Lake until the early 1900s when the mills came. When
So
the mills came,
the railroad was the key.
Yes, yes. But the mill was even here before the railroad.
Oh.
But I think somebody had knowledge of it because the president of B&A was also the part owner of the first mill.
Oh, okay.
And his son was the one, Preston Burley was the one that operated the mill.
So he was bringing the railroad
Yes.
to his mill.
Yes, Albert Burley was the president at the time of Bangor and Aroostook Railroad.
Oh, okay.
He
And
also served as a state senator.
Was he from Holton?
He was from Holton, yes.
Oh, okay.
He was from Holton.
So we're talking 100 years ago,
Yes.
plus.
Oh, yeah, we're talking 1902. It's around there.
So this is not his mill that was the big one there.
Yeah,
Was he
it started. That
Okay.
was he's the one that started that. Him and a guy by the name of Cushing. Now Cushing, when you go to Plaisted, there's on the railroad tracks. It says Cushing.
Oh, yeah?
Well, that's because
Cushing siding?
yes, Cushing. And I always wondered why that was, who that was, and why that was put there. Well, I found out that he was a partner of Albert Burley when they built this mill, the Fish River Lumber Company, and that shortly after the mill was completed here, he sold out and he went and built a mill and placed it, and it was called Cushing's Mill.
Wow.
So at one time in Eagle Lake, and between Eagle Lake and Placid, there were like 7, 8 different mills. It was really a mill town, but not just one. There was a lot of mills, a lot of little mills,
Woods.
plus the big one. Yes,
Woods
yes,
mills.
yes. And that it brought in all kinds of people. I mean, we started off with an Irishman, Richard Wood, who got a land grant about a few years after Sfuenado, and then it really started. The population was pretty much French Canadian, but the mills and the railroad brought in different nationalities. The railroad brought in Italians, because basically the line was laid by Italian immigrants.
Right.
And then followed as the mills came in and created a need there for businesses. We ended up with a clothing store by a company called Livingston Clothing Company. And they operated till, I think it was like 1922. But it was the first clothing store in Eagle Lake. It eventually was turned over to Louis Klein. And Louis Klein operated the store. He was the one that probably operated a store the longest of anyone in this community. If you wanted anything, you went to Louis Klein's store.
Is that right?
He sold clothing, he sold jewelry, he sold anything that you can imagine. As a kid, I used to go there, and I used to see all the trinkets that he had, and he was probably one of the better known stores in the community for being able to provide anything he wanted to provide.
You know, I learned from Dick Dumais, I interviewed him. His father used to have his clothing store in Madawaska, Fred Dumais and Sons.
Right.
Everybody went there to buy their clothing, the men. But it had burned down just before he took it over, and it was Klein's store. Klein's Boston clothing store. And
Right.
then in Fort Kent we have Klein Hill. So there must have been some Kleins there.
Yes.
And there was one here, probably the same family.
Yeah.
You know?
Because with the mill and the influx of people coming in, we had different nationalities. We had like people of Jewish descent. We had the Kleins, the Rappaports, and then we had English-speaking Smiths. And, it became really a diverse little community. And eventually, a movie theater was built.
Really?
They took a shed that used to be used by the mill for log haulers, and they converted that into a movie hall on Old Main Street.
Now, if we go back here, this was Main Street?
Yes.
Old Main Street, was it Main Street?
Yeah, that was the Main Street. That's where you had all the stores.
Oh, okay.
You had all the businesses. You had the butcher, you had the general store, you had the clothing store. That was the street where the business community
Right at
was.
the end of the lake here.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I imagine
the intersection of Route 11 all the way to the railroad tracks.
Okay. So people could walk to all these
Yes,
things.
and at a time they had wooden sidewalks, so that they had to have wooden sidewalks because it was just dirt.
Yeah.
And so and dirt. And then the other thing that they had was, in order to get the water off the roads, they had these ditches, these deep ditches. So it wouldn't have been very convenient to be able to cross from one side to the other.
The fossette.
The fossette, yes.
And people used to their septic systems when they didn't have any septic. Everything went in the lake, huh?
Oh yeah, yeah.
The fossette, pareil, yeah.
That's right. Oh yeah, here it was like there was from the time I remember, there was a tremendous need here for a sewer system.
Yeah.
Everybody had their own little methodology of dealing with the waste, and most of it found itself in a ditch.
Yeah.
And so
I know in Saragat we never learned how to, most of us never learned how to swim because the lake was too dirty. There's a starch factory emptying into it and all this, everybody's sewers, you know. So I imagine it was the same here.
Yeah, but we went for a long time. Where the public beach is now, you couldn't go there because that was always full of logs. And even after the mills were gone, the remnants of that still existed. So there was a place, though, on Furlong Road where LeBeff had his house there.
Okay.
Between LeBeff and Furlong, the Furlong residence. Right there, there was a beach, beach area, and that's where people went swimming. The water here in Eagle Lake is pretty clean because it's one of the it's the lake that is the center of all the fish lakes, so it empties more often than any other lake. I think I remember someone telling me at one time that it emptied itself almost like once a month, so 12 times a year the water turns over. So
it's almost like a river because there's currents in there.
Yeah, so there's currents, yeah.
Yeah, it's the last lake of the chain.
The Fish River, yeah.
And sure, because the first one is Long Lake.
That's right.
And when it starts there, right at the bottom of the town itself, it was dead water.
Yeah.
And whatever they threw in there stayed right there, except for the wind would carry it sometimes a few miles, and they would come back. You know? Yeah.
Well, when I was a kid here, the municipal dump was along the lake.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just. Where the picnic area, where the state has its picnic area, you took that road, you went down, and you dumped the garbage right there on the bank of the lake.
Yeah.
They closed that, I think, only in the late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah. Different world.
Oh yeah.
So now your great grandfather is the one who moved here from Frenchville.
Yeah, Joseph Raymond.
And
he moved here. He was pretty elderly when he moved here.
Okay.
He moved here with his family. He was like the patriarch of the family, but he was retired, had been retired for quite some time. And in those days, it's like if you lived on a farm and you no longer were able to farm, well, you most likely turned over the farm to the elder son, which in this case happened. He had a son by the name of Joseph. His name was Joe, and he passed his farm over to Joseph Raymond Jr. Joseph had married a woman by the name of Modeste Pioud, who came from the Frenchville area, and he had like 6 children with her. But he died at the age of 34. So he had a brother who at the time was going to the Madawaska Training School. Because apparently in those days the oldest son would get the farm, and the second son would get like a college education or something, or some greater level of education.
Yeah.
So that man that was going to the Madawaska Training School, his name was Leon Raymond, and he was he was the man that became my grandfather.
Oh, okay.
So when his brother died, my great grandfather called him back to the farm and had my grandfather marry his brother's wife.
Oh, il était pas marié.
No, he wasn't. He was a bachelor.
Okay.
He was a swinging bachelor at the time. So he ended up marrying Modeste Pioud, who was then Modeste Raymond. Well, he had
with 6 kids.
With 6 kids, and he had 2 other kids with her. And then she died.
Really?
Yes.
My dad's died.
Yes. And that's about when they moved here to Eagle Lake. So when they moved here, they moved not only my great-grandfather, but my grandfather moved, his two sisters moved, and the family of 8 now
Yeah.
moved here to Eagle Lake, and they started working at the mill.
So they gave up the farm.
They gave up the farm, yeah. My grandfather never went to work at the mill. He did all kinds of odd jobs. One of the jobs that he did have was he became what they called a Devoe
Okay.
for St. Mary's. So he worked with Father Marcoux.
The sexton.
Yeah, the sexton, yes. And
So
he
that's
did,
as soon as he gets here, that's
basically what he starts doing.
Okay.
Because he had learned a little bit of carpentry on the farm, and so they hired him here to maintain really the rectory but primarily the cemetery, because he's the one that made the boxes
Oh.
for the people that and also some of the wooden monuments. So people that couldn't afford the granite or the marble monuments bought wooden monuments, and my grandfather would make those. He also taught school, adult ed.
Oh yeah, he had gone to Madawaska
Yes.
training.
Yeah, in fact, he built that little school there in T15R6, where Hector Bouchard is.
Okay.
On the left-hand side as you're traveling south. He had built that little building. It was used as a school, and he taught there periodically. Because he ended up marrying the woman that became my grandmother, Zéline Ringuet. And she originally was from Saint Agathe, had moved here, had married someone here, and something happened with the marriage. There's all kinds of stories. But she ended up getting her marriage annulled. Father Marcoux ended up annulling her marriage. And a few years later, my grandfather was working as a sexton. He ended up, for some reason, he had met this woman, but she had gone back to her parents. My grandfather ended up having to go to Saint Agathe to live there for a while. Apparently, he was in the bootlegging business, or had done a little bit of bootlegging. He was getting himself close to getting into trouble, and so he escaped and took the train and went to Saint Agathe and went into hiding there for a while, and re-met this lady and married her.
Now, did you see your great-grandfather married a Ringuet too?
No, my grandfather did.
Yeah, okay.
So Leon, who had already married Modeste, and she had died, now married Zéline Ringuet.
Okay. Okay.
And it's with Zéline that my grandfather ended up having my father.
Okay.
And he ended up having 6 kids.
So he had
with her.
8 before.
He had 8 before. He ended up with 6 with her. So they had 14.
Bah.
Okay? And she lived, she died of childbirth. The last kids that she had, or a set of twins, there was complications, and she died. So he became a widower again. And with all those kids, he couldn't really be a widower for that long, so he made connections with another lady, this time Maria Nadeau, and that's how he ended up in T15R6, because she was a widow. She had 6 or 8 kids, and so he moved with her on her farm. And he stayed there until their farmhouse burnt. And and then he ended up here in Eagle Lake.
You know, that'd make a nice movie.
Yeah, it would. It would.
Especially the smuggling part.
Oh yeah.
Bootlegging.
Yeah.
Bootlegging, you said, huh?
Yeah, bootlegging. Oh yeah, he was bootlegging.
Well, that was a way of life up here.
Oh yeah, it was.
You know, my father, he had a winter that he was doing nothing much, and he started the bootlegging. And on the last day, he got caught, and he said the agents came from Eagle Lake.
Yeah. Well, that was the agent that almost caught my grandfather. His name was Cash Austin.
Oh yeah, Cash, very famous.
Yeah. So my grandfather had gone into hiding at one of his relatives here and waited for the most convenient time and jumped on the train and ended up in Saint Agathe.
He went to Friendsville and then walked up, and I got that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's fascinating, you know that, because see all the people dying and remarrying. And,
Yeah. It was hard. It was a hard life.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.